In 2021, my daughter's surgery in Houston. Then a stranger covered everything. My name is Renata Sousa, and I was 31 the year my daughter stopped walking without pain. Isla's was 6. She had been limping since April, the kind of limp you tell yourself is nothing. A pulled muscle, a growing pain, the ordinary complaints of a child who runs too hard and rests too little. By June, the limp had a name: developmental dysplasia, left hip, moderate to severe. The pediatric orthopedic surgeon at Texas Children's Hospital used words like corrective osteotomy and recovery timeline and weight-bearing restrictions. And I wrote all of them down in a spiral notebook because writing things down was the only way I knew how to hold them still. The surgery was scheduled for September 14th, 2021. The cost, after my insurance processed what it would cover, was $23,400 out of pocket. I was a medical interpreter. I worked 3 hospitals on a rotating contract basis, Spanish and Portuguese, sometimes both in the same shift. I earned enough to keep us in a 1-bedroom apartment in Pasadena, a Houston suburb where the rent was manageable and the school was good, and the commute to Texas Children's was 40 minutes on a clear day. I did not earn enough to absorb $23,400 without losing everything else. I called my parents on a Tuesday night in July. My father, Eduardo, answered. I told him about Isla's diagnosis, the surgery, the recovery, the cost. I told him I wasn't asking for all of it. I told him I had $6,000 saved and that I needed help with the rest. My parents owned a landscaping company, San Antonio, that had been operating for 19 years. They were not wealthy, but they were stable in a way I had spent my entire adult life trying to become. My father said he would talk to my mother. My mother, Carmela, called back the following Sunday. I remember it was Sunday because Isla was watching cartoons in the next room, and I had closed the bathroom door so she wouldn't hear my voice change. Carmela said they couldn't help. The company had a slow quarter. They had their own expenses. She said it the way she said most difficult things, quickly, cleanly, without space for a response. Then she added the line I have thought about every day since. Renata, these things have a way of working out. You're resourceful. I sat on the edge of the bathtub after she hung up. Isla laughed at something on the television. The sound came through the wall, clear and bright and completely ordinary, the laugh of a child who didn't know yet that the adults responsible for her were failing at the math. I gave myself 10 minutes. Then I washed my face, opened the bathroom door, and sat on the couch next to my daughter and watched the rest of the cartoons. I did not tell her what her grandmother had said. I opened a fundraising page that night. I wrote 3 paragraphs about Isla's diagnosis and the surgery date, and the gap between what insurance covered and what the hospital needed. Uploaded a photo of Isla at her last birthday, chocolate cake on her chin, one hand raised like she was accepting an award. I set the goal at $17,000, and I shared it to my personal social media with the specific, humiliating courage of a person who has no other options. By the end of the first week, $840 had come in. Small donations, $10, $25, $50, mostly from coworkers and hospital staff who had worked alongside me for years. It was generous. It was not enough. By the end of August, I had $4,200 from the fundraiser and $6,000 from savings. And a surgery date 3 weeks away, and a gap of $13,200 that had no solution I could see. That was the week the envelope arrived. Part 2 is where I tell you what was inside it and who sent it. Drop a comment and subscribe. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday. Plain white, standard size, no return address. My name and apartment number, written in black ballpoint pen, neat and deliberate. The handwriting of someone who had taken their time. The postmark was Houston. Nothing else on the outside that told me anything. Inside, a single folded sheet of paper and a cashier's check. I unfolded the paper first. It was a handwritten note, 4 sentences on plain white paper. My name is not important. I heard about Isla through someone at Texas Children's. No child should wait for surgery, because the numbers don't add up. Please use this for whatever she needs. The cashier's check was made out to Renata Sousa. The amount was $13,200. Exactly the gap to the dollar. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Isla was at school. The apartment was quiet, except for the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead and the sound of a neighbor's television through the wall. I read the note 4 times. I turned the check over. I looked at the envelope again for anything I had missed. There was nothing. No name. No account number. No way to trace it back to this person. Someone had calculated exactly what I needed and sent exactly that. I called the hospital's billing department the next morning. I asked whether a cashier's check made out to a patient or guarantor could be applied directly to an account balance. The woman on the phone, whose name was Deborah, and who had the measured patience of someone who handled difficult calls all day, walked me through the process. Yes. With proper endorsement and documentation, it could be applied to Isla's account. I asked her one more question. Had anyone called the hospital asking about Isla's case? About the balance. A pause, ma'am. We can't disclose patient account inquiries. I understood. I thanked her and hung up. Someone had called. That was the only explanation for the precision of the number. I want to tell you about the week before the envelope arrived, because it matters to understand what that week cost me. I had called my parents again in late August, not to ask for money a second time. I had already accepted that answer. I called because Isla had asked me on a Tuesday morning, while I was braiding her hair before school, whether Abuela and Abuelo were coming to the hospital. She asked it the way 6-year-olds ask things. Directly, without strategy, without understanding that the question had a weight I didn't know how to carry. I told her I wasn't sure yet. I told her we would see. That afternoon, I called my mother. I told her Isla had asked about them. I told her the surgery was September 14th. I told her I wasn't asking for money. I was asking if they would come. Carmela said September was complicated. My father had a big installation job scheduled that week, a commercial property in New Braunfels. She said they would try to visit after Isla was home and recovered. They would try to visit after. Not before, not during. After, when the hard part was over and the visit would cost them nothing but a tank of gas and an afternoon. I said I understood. I said goodbye. I hung up the phone and went back to my shift because I had a patient waiting, and the only thing I knew how to do when everything felt impossible was to keep doing the next necessary thing. The surgery happened on September 14th as scheduled. Isla wore a hospital gown printed with yellow stars, and she held my hand until they took her through the double doors. And then I sat in the waiting room alone for 4 hours and 20 minutes with a cup of coffee I didn't drink and a spiral notebook I didn't open. My coworker Diana sat with me for the first 2 hours. She had taken a personal day without telling me she was going to. She just appeared at 7:15 in the waiting room with a paper bag of breakfast sandwiches and sat down beside me and said nothing for a long time, which was exactly right. My parents did not come. They sent a text at 11:43 while Isla was still in the operating room. Thinking of you both today. Let us know how it goes. Diana looked at my phone when it buzzed. She didn't say anything. She handed me half a breakfast sandwich I hadn't touched and looked back at the wall. The surgeon came out at 12:08. The procedure had gone exactly as planned. Isla was in recovery. I could see her in 20 minutes. I walked into that recovery room, and my daughter was pale and small against the white sheets, and her left leg was in a positioning device, and she looked at me when I came through the door and said, "Mama," in a voice that was still thick with anesthesia. I held her hand. I told her it was over. I told her she had been so brave. I did not cry until I was in the hospital parking garage 3 hours later, alone in my car with the engine off. The kind of crying that doesn't make any sound because you've been holding it together for so long that when it finally comes, there's nothing left for volume. Then I drove home and called the hospital billing department and applied the cashier's check to Isla's account. I still didn't know who had sent it. But I had started to have a theory. The theory started with a woman named Gloria Reyes. Gloria was a pediatric nurse at Texas Children's, Ward 7, the orthopedic recovery floor. She had been assigned to Isla the morning after surgery, the quiet, competent kind of nurse who checks vitals without waking the patient and leaves a cup of water exactly where your hand will find it in the dark. On Isla's second morning in the hospital, Gloria came in for the 6 a.m. check and found me already awake, sitting in the chair beside the bed with my spiral notebook open, reviewing the discharge instructions the resident had left the night before. She looked at the notebook, then at me, and said something I wasn't expecting. "You're the interpreter. Spanish and Portuguese. I've seen you on the 3rd floor. I told her yes. She checked Isla's vitals without rushing. She adjusted the positioning device with the careful efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times and still treated it like the first. Before she'd left, she stopped at the door and turned around. "Someone was asking about your daughter," she said. "A few weeks before the surgery. I shouldn't say more than that. But I thought you should know it wasn't random." She left before I could form a question. I sat with that for 2 days. It wasn't random. Someone had asked about Isla specifically. Someone connected enough to Texas Children's to get information about a patient's account balance, but careful enough to send an anonymous cashier's check rather than pay the hospital directly. Someone who knew the exact number. I went back through every interaction I'd had at the hospital in the months before the surgery. Every shift, every patient, every colleague, every waiting room conversation. I was a familiar face in that building. I had worked those corridors for 4 years. Hundreds of people knew my name. I narrowed it by the detail that mattered most. The note had said someone at Texas Children's, not a friend, not a colleague, someone connected to the institution itself. There was one name I kept returning to, Dr. James Whitfield. He was a retired pediatric surgeon, 71 years old, who still came in twice a week as a volunteer consultant on complex cases. I had interpreted for him 3 times over the years, twice in Spanish, once in Portuguese for a family from Brazil whose son had a spinal condition that had taken 8 months and 2 surgeries to resolve. He was precise and unhurried, and he had a way of explaining difficult diagnoses that made families feel like they were being informed rather than managed. After the Brazilian family's second surgery, the father had tried to give Dr. Whitfield an envelope of cash in the hallway outside the recovery room. Dr. Whitfield had refused it gently and said something I had translated and never forgotten. "Tell him the work is the payment. Tell him to use that money for something his son will remember." I had thought about that sentence many times since. I went to the volunteer coordinator's office on a Thursday afternoon between shifts. Her name was Margaret, mid-50s, organized in the way that people who manage chaos for a living become organized. I told her I wanted to thank someone who had helped my family during Isla's surgery, and that I wasn't sure how to reach them directly. She listened. She didn't ask for a name. She said if I wrote a letter, she would make sure it reached the right person through the appropriate channels. I wrote it that evening in my car, in the hospital parking garage. 3 paragraphs on a page torn from my spiral notebook. I didn't name Dr. Whitfield. I described what had happened, the envelope, the note, the exact amount. And I said that whoever had done this had given my daughter her surgery and given me back something I hadn't known I was losing, which was the ability to believe that people outside my family could be trusted. I folded it, put it in an envelope, and gave it to Margaret the next morning. 4 days later, I received a response. It came the same way the first note had come. Plain white envelope, black ballpoint pen, my name written in the same deliberate hand. Inside, 1 sentence. "She's going to run circles around that hip. I've seen it before." No name, no return address. But the handwriting matched. I sat in my car and read that sentence 6 times. Then I looked up at the building in front of me, at the floors of windows behind which people were doing the quiet, essential work of keeping other people alive. And I thought about a retired surgeon who came in twice a week because the work was the payment, and who had done a calculation in private and decided that a 6-year-old girl he had never met was worth $13,200 of his own money. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone. These things have a way of working out. You're resourceful. She had been right about the outcome and completely wrong about why. These things had worked out because a stranger had done the math my family wouldn't do. Isla came home 12 days after surgery. She had a small scar on her left hip that she called her line, and a physical therapy schedule that ran 6 days a week, and a stuffed elephant named Captain that the nursing staff on Ward 7 had signed with a silver marker before discharge. Gloria had signed it first. She had drawn a small star next to her name, Dr. Whitfield's name wasn't on it, but I looked for it. Part 4 is where my parents finally came to visit, and where I said the thing I had been holding for 4 months. Drop a comment and subscribe. My parents came in November, 6 weeks after the surgery, 6 weeks after the double doors, the 4 hours and 20 minutes, the text at 11:43. 6 weeks after Diana had sat with me in the waiting room on her personal day with breakfast sandwiches she didn't announce, and a silence she knew how to hold. My mother called on a Friday to say they were driving up Saturday morning. She said it the way she announced most things, as a logistical fact rather than a request, as if the timing were a detail rather than a statement. I said fine. I said we would be home. Isla was doing well by then. She was moving through the apartment on a small four-arm crutch, navigating the kitchen and the bathroom and the short hallway with the focused determination of a child who had been told she would walk without pain by spring and had decided to hold the physical therapist personally accountable for that promise. She was 6 years old, and she was already impatient with recovery, which her therapist said was an excellent sign. My parents arrived at 11. My father carried a bag from a San Antonio bakery Isla loved conchas and empanadas wrapped in white paper. My mother had brought a new stuffed animal, a small brown bear with a yellow ribbon around its neck. Eyes accepted, both with the generous enthusiasm of a child who doesn't yet know how to hold a grudge on someone else's behalf. I watched my mother kneel beside Isla on the living room floor, watched her examine the crutch with exaggerated curiosity, watched her make Isla laugh by pretending she couldn't figure out how it worked. My mother was good with children. She always had been. It was one of the complicated things about her. My father sat at the kitchen table and drank the coffee I made and asked careful questions about the surgery, about the recovery timeline, about Isla's physical therapy schedule. He asked them the way he asked most things, quietly, looking at the table more than at me. After lunch, while Isla napped, my parents sat in the living room, and my mother said the thing she had come to say. She said they felt terrible about not being there. She said it had been a hard decision. She said the installation job in New Braunfels had been a significant contract, and September had genuinely been difficult, and she hoped I understood that it wasn't a reflection of how much they loved Isla. I let her finish. Then I told them about the envelope. I told them the amount. I told them the note. I told them about Gloria's 2 sentences in the doorway of the recovery room. I told them about the letter I had written and the 1 sentence that had come back in the same handwriting. My mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "See, these things do work out." I looked at her. I kept my voice at the same level I used at work, the professional register, the one that carried information without editorial. A 71-year-old stranger did the math that you wouldn't do, I said. He didn't know Isla. He had never met her. He calculated exactly what she needed, and he sent it without putting his name on it because he didn't do it for the credit. He did it because he decided she was worth it. My father put his coffee cup down. "I'm not angry," I said. "I want to be clear about that. But I need you to understand what happened here. Isla had her surgery because a stranger loved her better than her family did that month. And I am never going to pretend that didn't happen just to make this visit comfortable." The room was quiet. Outside, a car passed on the street. The ceiling fan turned. My mother looked at her hands. My father looked at the window. Neither of them said anything for a long time. Then my father said, in a voice I hadn't heard from him since I was a child, "You're right. I should have found a way." My mother didn't speak again for several minutes. When she did, she said only, "I'm sorry, Renata." It came out small and unpolished, nothing like her usual delivery. I nodded. I accepted it for what it was, not enough, but real. Part 5 is where I tell you what happened to Isla, to Dr. Whitfield, and to the word stranger. Drop a comment and subscribe. Isla ran her first full lap around the school track in March. Not a jog, a run. Arms out, head back. The particular abandon of a child who has been told for 6 months what her body couldn't do, and has finally been given permission to forget the list. Her physical therapist, a woman named Corinne, who had become one of the most important people in our lives without either of us planning it, stood at the finish line with a stopwatch she didn't need and tears she didn't bother hiding. I recorded it on my phone. I watched it back 4 times that evening after Isla was asleep. I still watch it sometimes. I went back to Texas Children's in April. I had been thinking about it since November, since my parents' visit. Since this moment my father had said, I should have found a way in a voice. I hadn't heard from him since childhood. I went to the volunteer coordinator's office. Margaret was at her desk. She looked up when I came in and said she'd been wondering when I'd come back. I asked if Dr. Whitfield was in the building. He was. He came Tuesdays and Thursdays. It was a Thursday. She called up to the 4th floor. She handed me the phone. His voice was exactly as I remembered it from the interpretation sessions. Unhurried, precise. The voice of a man who had delivered difficult news enough times to understand that tone carried more than content. I told him my name. I told him Isla had run a lap in March. I told him I knew it was him, and that I wasn't calling to make it complicated, only to say that she was running. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's the only update I needed." I asked him one question. Why Isla? Why us? Another pause. "You interpreted for a family from Brazil 3 years ago," he said. "A boy with a spinal condition. Do you remember?" I remembered. "You translated something I said to the father. About the work being the payment." He was quiet. "You said it in Portuguese, and then you said it again in English. Very quietly. Like you wanted to make sure you'd gotten it right." He paused. "I thought about that for a long time afterward. The care you took with someone else's words." He paused once more. "When I heard about your daughter, I thought, that's someone who pays attention. Her child deserves the same." I sat in my car in the parking garage for a long time after that call. My parents came for Isla's 7th birthday in June. They came on time. They stayed 2 days. My father fixed the kitchen cabinet that had been loose since we moved in. My mother taught Isla to make conchas from scratch, flour on both their hands, Isla standing on a step stool to reach the counter. It wasn't everything, but it was more than November. Some distances closed slowly. I was willing to let this one try. Dr. Whitfield retired fully in September of that year. Margaret told me when I passed her office. I left a note with her to pass along, one sentence. "She's going to run circles around everything." You were right, that's my story. One envelope, one stranger, and a daughter who runs. If someone ever showed up for you when your family wouldn't, you already know what that's worth. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.